Hi, I'm Dexter Gelfand, and you might be familiar with my topic and my practice and my field of therapeutic spiritual counseling, which very briefly is the way that I approach giving counseling sessions to people to help them to get over whatever it is they want to get over, to resolve anxiety, depression, any feelings of insecurity, whatever may be disturbing to a person, and also whatever positive goals, aspirations, uh, characteristics, or attributes a person might feel a need to find or refine or develop in themselves. That's essentially my practice of therapeutic spiritual counseling. There are many videos of how I go about that, but the subject for this talk is how I got here, okay? My story. Um, and It is an interesting story. How did I get here? How did I come to do this? I've basically evolved my own techniques, often derived from a variety of sources, refined, extrapolated, added to by my observations. And I am a very, very effective therapeutic counselor. So how did I get here? Well, I know that this has always been my interest and my passion in life, even as a small child. So let's start with a third grade class trip to Thomas Edison's lab in West Orange, New Jersey. This was one impactful moment for me on my path when I saw a poster hanging in Edison's lab, which I'm sure can still be seen today. And it's a quote from an 18th century painter, Sir Joshua Reynolds. And it goes like this: I have never forgotten this since I first read it as a third grader. There is no expedient to which a man will not resort to avoid the true labor of thinking. Wow, I can't tell you how that still guides my life in many ways. What does that mean? Well, if it isn't obvious, what it means is that we tend to be lazy in our thinking. Very common, we will just accept an answer from an external source. We will take the word of an authority, an expert, a book, whatever, a friend, anything. We are not often, inspired, motivated to really see things for ourselves and think them through. And in any field of interest, it is really, really important to think for oneself and see for oneself, because if you're not doing that, besides all the other liabilities, you are making yourself very small and unimportant and granting power and knowledge and authority to external sources, not trusting yourself enough. There's greatness in all of us. But if you don't care to take the time to operate from your own perceptions and your own viewpoint, you're cheating yourself out of that. You're also going to come to an awful lot of wrong conclusions by just accepting dogma, rhetoric, authority, and so forth. But that really sort of blew my mind. 8 years old, third grade, there is no expedient to which a man will resort to avoid the true labor of thinking. Wow. I think that I thought differently from that moment on. And just a couple years later, I was 10 years old. And again, I guess I always had this fascination with the human mind and spirit. It just occurred to me that if you understood why a person did what they did or said what they said, the essential internal reasons for a person's behaviors, you could never be upset with them. You would understand. Doesn't mean you would have to agree with what they were saying or doing, but you would understand really where they were coming from and how they came to behave this way or do what they were doing. Understanding. Just that idea that every moment of being upset with another person was a manifestation of a lack of understanding. That's kind of a mind blower, isn't it? So that definitely inspired me to better understand, to strive to understand the mind and spirit others and myself. And this is very much, I think, a spiritual concept. And not long after that, I come from a Jewish family, and I went to Hebrew school to be bar mitzvahed. And one day I asked my dad, since we're Jewish, why aren't we Orthodox? Why don't we follow all the procedures and say all the prayers and the full lifestyle and all the commitment to all the religious activities and behaviors, habits and rituals that are part of being an Orthodox Jew? Why weren't we doing that since we're Jewish? And my father's answer to me was, well, I believe very simply that if you're a good person, you'll go to heaven. I still think that was a wonderful thing for my dad to tell me. It was so liberating, so freeing. I think those of us that come from any sort of religious background tend to have indoctrinated into us the idea that whatever our religious association is the one true way of understanding God, life, and the universe. And so I was essentially freed. I was liberated of that ball and chain of thought, which again was in the same direction of being able to evaluate any information for myself, to do as I saw fit, in keeping with there is no expedient to which a man will resort to avoid the true labor of thinking. So again, this was further opening me up to being able to consider and explore all things, and particularly in terms of my passions and interests, all things relating to better understanding the mind and the spirit. And along with that, healing the mind and the spirit, accessing the full potential of the mind and spirit, and fully connecting with all that we are. And so I read a lot of different materials of a spiritual nature through my developmental years. Not necessarily very getting to the point of much involvement, but a little bit about meditation. I read books about psychology and psychiatry, a lot of interesting ideas along the way, and also such things as EST and Scientology came up. And in all of these things, I noticed that there were people who seemed to gain tremendous enlightenment and a sense of well-being through all these different things, and I guess also maybe I was a little bit naive in the idea that all these things were wonderful, but without a doubt, all of these things can have wonderful aspects for some people, so nothing should be dismissed out of hand. That goes back to there was no expedient to which a man will resort to avoid the true labor of thinking. So no expedient to which a man will not resort to avoid the true labor of thinking. Again, just being opened up to things. And even through these times, I just found myself having the I don't know what the right word is, the presence, the beingness, the personality maybe, I don't know, but the presence of some sort of counselor, some sort of therapist or spiritual enlightenment person, some combination of these things. I really felt that within me, and other people sensed it too, because it has never been uncommon for somebody who didn't know me well to just walk up to me and say, I feel like I can talk to you, and start telling me their problems or their issues, and they just somehow sensed that I'd be a good person to talk to or that I could listen. That's always been part of me. So that's always been part of my path. And, I remember I must have been 22, 23, and I ran into a friend of mine that I haven't seen in a while, and I asked him what he'd been up to lately. And he mentioned that he was taking Scientology courses. Like I said, I'd come across some information on Scientology. So I'd been to a few meetings about meditation and other things, and so I wanted to explore this a little bit. It piqued my interest, and so I kind of talked my friend into bringing me along. And I participated in an initial introductory exercise, and it really went very well. I came to realize some things about how I was living, how I was treating other people, and what was wrong with how I was attributing issues I had between myself and some people close to me to them when it had more to do with me. And that was a wonderful, enlightening moment. And so I kind of grabbed onto that with both hands, and I got very involved in Scientology somewhat quickly. And in time, I trained to be what they call a Scientology auditor or counselor. In the early 80s, I was part of approximately 130 people from various contingents from the Eastern USA organizations of Scientology, all sent down to Coral Gables, Miami, to this one organization. We were all to be trained to a standard higher level of Scientology auditors or counselors. And I really thrived on the opportunity. One thing I can say about any of these things, whether it's Scientology or any other paradigm, is to some degree how well you will, how proficient you'll become at these things is a function of your own abilities, your own potentials, your own passion, and your own interest. There can be a system, but ultimately what you will do with the materials very much comes down to how motivated you are. You know, I was very highly motivated. This was an opportunity for me to learn a lot about how I could help other people, enlighten them, unburden them of their mental and spiritual issues. And like I said, I grabbed on with both hands, you know, and being down there very quickly became the rose to the top of the entire group and was appointed the person to be in charge of all these trainees. And I was even handed the patients, so to speak, the participants, or in Scientology terms, the PCs, pre-clears as they're called, from their own professional guidance center, that their professional trained Scientology auditors were having a rough time dealing with and helping. They were finding them difficult. Eventually, while I was still training, I was actually handed the tough cases. It worked out very well. Of course, I took a lot of pride in that, and for me, it was a lot of fun. So from there, I went back to my local organization in New York City, where I was appointed what they call lead Hubbard Guidance Center auditor, which meant that I was sort of the number one Scientology auditor counselor for New York City at that time. And so I was very much gung-ho. You know, I have to say that at that point in time, I was swallowing the Kool-Aid. You know, I was all gung-ho. I was believed almost every word of it. You know, I was living the life, and I was saying the right things and wearing the right attitudes. Very dedicated. I will say that one early crack in the scheme of things for me was defining my role and my purpose as a Scientology auditor or counselor as being to help L. Ron Hubbard clear the planet. You know, and I have to say that irked me. I didn't express it to my peers, didn't want to rock that boat, but I took a lot of pride in doing what I did for the person in front of me. I didn't do it for that guy over there who wrote these things. And I felt there was something wrong with that. I think that might have been my first intuition, that there was something wrong with all of this. I found it offensive and insulting to define my role not as what I was passionate about, which was enlightening and helping that person right in front of me to accomplish what they needed and wanted to accomplish for themselves, for their minds and spirits. But instead to just water it down to, I'm helping that guy do it. No. To me, that just didn't ring true. And I felt like it was a diminishing of me. You know, and I guess maybe I did sense that it was also a bit of a spiritual enslavement to round everybody up and indoctrinate them in the idea that our job is to serve this guy, who is then taken to be the one who makes all the magic happen. So yeah, that was something that I kept to myself. I could handle just keeping that quietly within myself. But that always was a bit of a disturbing factor for me. I was there to do what I was doing for the person in front of me and for the fulfillment of doing it. And that's still true today. The way that I define my role, or the proper role of any form of therapist or spiritual counselor, it shouldn't be to impose their way on another person. It shouldn't be to set goals for them or define what their goals are or should be. It's very simple. If you're there to help another person as a spiritual counselor or therapist of any kind, then the right goal can only be to facilitate the accomplishing of whatever reason that person is there for. Whatever their purpose is in coming to me, my job is to facilitate the accomplishing of what they're coming to me for. Not what I have predetermined from some chart or book or external source says, well, we want them to have this and then we want them to have that. No, to me, that's very wrong. So I guess that was also something that was an awareness that was growing in me. Now, there are a lot of potentially therapeutic and spiritually liberating techniques within this massive library of information that is all credited to the term Scientology within the umbrella of Scientology. The truth is that a lot of these principles, concepts, and techniques come from other places and have existed for far longer, but that's not how it's filtered to you in learning about Scientology. Not dissimilar from a lot of other practices, I'm sure. Anyway, and for me, the breaking point with the Church of Scientology was, as a staff member, the never-ending and never-increasing demands for my time and my devotion above all other things, and including family. Okay, now that for me was a real button, because it was a time in my life when I had small children. I had my boys, and that was the best time of my life. My boys were small. It's just such a source of joy to experience your children and play with them and help them learn and grow and just be with them. And the Church of Scientology became something that was conflicting with that. It was like they wanted all my time all the time. It was like our mission is more important than anything else. Your children will grow up in a dangerous world with drugs and crime if you pay attention to them when you should just be paying attention to us. We're the solution to everything. The fallacy of that, and the arrogance of that, and the unreasoning, callous, lacking empathy approach of, we're all shoulder to shoulder in this wonderful cause, and whatever your personal interests are, you got to set them aside because this is more important. People actually get turned hostile in the organization towards you when you say, oh, I'm taking my family time, or I've got plans with my children. No, they want you to stay later and later, and that was not acceptable to me. That was quite the opposite of acceptable, and things like that for me were the breaking point. And I was rather emphatic in saying I had enough of the way I was being treated by the Church of Scientology. So essentially, things like that were the breaking point. I left. I tried to help for years from the outside, to come in and volunteer my services when it worked for me, and always ran into inexplicable barriers and roadblocks and things like that. All I wanted to do was help. I just wanted to help. And so the more I experienced that, the more I felt I needed to distance myself from these unreasonable people who just didn't seem to be capable of listening, of understanding anything. One example, when I was in the New York organization and training, I was reading one particular issue, and it happened to have a typo in it. It had a mistake in it. And so I brought that to someone's attention and said, you need to send something up to where they print and publish these books. There's a typo in here that really needs to be corrected. And I was told to restudy and restudy by all the different Scientology methods to clear up my misunderstanding, because how could anything from L. Ron Hubbard have a typo in it? It was obviously my problem. I was word cleared, as they say, over and over, and it was very, very aggravating and frustrating for me, because it was obviously a typo. I mean, the person who kept insisting and sending me back to restudy this, I said to her, okay, why don't you just read that sentence? Tell me how that makes sense to you. Tell me what that means, if that makes sense. Go ahead. And the answer I got was, well, I'm not as highly trained as you. It's too technical for me. The way I solved that particular situation was to look in the library of the building to see if possibly somebody else had already corrected that typo and revised that particular issue. And fortunately, it had been done. I found that. I showed this to that person. Basically, see, because somebody else was smarter than you or more understanding than you, fortunately, this error, which it is, has already been corrected. But left up to you, this would have never happened. And this is a very good demonstration, the way this woman was indoctrinated and trained in Scientology, that, no, you just accept, this is the truth, all of this, just as it is. You just assimilate it. Again, there is no expedient to which a man or woman will not resort to avoid the true labor of thinking. And any cult, which the Church of Scientology is absolutely a cult, like many others, any cult, that's what goes on. That's exactly what goes on. You're indoctrinated in what to think and what to believe, and to find the logic of the statements fascinating, and to find revelations in these words which are not necessarily even correct. That's part of the indoctrination process, I guess. So anyway, I moved on from all of this, from the organizations, but like many, many people who had been as indoctrinated as I actually still was, you walk away with the idea, with this condescending attitude that it's basically like L. Ron Hubbard presenting his personality as the way to be, and so from a status viewpoint or a being right viewpoint or a being superior viewpoint, you take this L. Ron Hubbard condescending attitude of the old man had it all right. The problem is people just don't get it. These Scientologists, they're not doing it right, they're not getting it right. Their tech is out, is the phrase, or one way of putting it. This condescending attitude towards everybody else that, you're making mistakes, you're not getting it right, you're not standard enough. Standard is the word. Imagine that. Something where the word standard is presented as the absolute height of competence. Scientology is one of those things in which, if you think about it, the most admirable way to be in Scientology is to be 100% standard, quote unquote. The highest level of competence, as defined by Scientology, is to follow somebody else's instructions perfectly. What does that say about disempowering people? What does that say about refusing to recognize and even to dismiss the idea that each one of us can be brilliant and great in our own ways? And what are we told is the purpose for getting on that ramp, on that Scientology bridge or any other paradigm, but with the idea that you're going to reach your full potential, you're going to be godlike, you're going to be so capable, you're going to be able to do anything. And then the more you get indoctrinated, eventually the idea that's implanted in you is the best you could be is to just get somebody else's instructions right. Ironic, no? Anyway, so more and more I was coming at, transcending or outgrowing a lot of this, okay? But I still, for many years, after I was no longer a member of the organization staff, I still very much had latched on to that condescending Scientologist personality of, I'm getting it right, almost nobody else is, and that's what the problem is. because I'm duplicating, I'm getting L. Ron Hubbard correctly, and for some reason everybody else can't because they're idiots and I'm not. That's essentially the attitude that gets drilled into you. And I have to confess, I had a lot of that in me for a good while. So anyway, years later, after working in an unrelated field in the printing industry, when the economy crashed in 2008, 2009, always having had this passion for helping other people, enlightening them, understanding the mind, helping people to transcend, understand, and resolve their issues. And I was laid off from a very high executive position in a printing company, and there weren't many opportunities to be found at that time with the economy so crashed. I decided this is the time to reinvent myself as a spiritual counselor. Now, my original thought was I'm going to be a really great independent Scientology auditor, and I started studying and researching and using my time that way and developing a practice. But the more I looked at this independently, the more I questioned things, the more I saw where my principles were not the same, where were things that I could not agree with about the way the approaches of Scientology, the techniques the way they were being used, and so forth. So I felt the absolute freedom to, over time this evolved more and more, to break out of that whole shell, to draw from that whatever I found valid, but with the idea that I could always change my mind again and have new considerations and new ideas. I researched and found where the techniques that were used in this particular subject, Scientology, who and where they really came from, which was almost never L. Ron Hubbard, if at all. And I studied those principles from these other people. There were several researchers involved who had once worked within the Scientology organization, then split off and further developed and extrapolated and came up with some great techniques. And I studied a lot of these, but with the idea that I still had the freedom to do what I wanted to do with these things, change them, write my own techniques. And more I evolved, studying other philosophies, and more I began to learn directly from what I could intuit, observe, and experience within my clients, my participants, understanding and actually feeling what was going on in their minds, seeing how the mechanisms worked. The more I did this, the greater my, for lack of a better term, telepathic empathy grew. The more I could understand what was going on in another person's mind, the more frequently I would know exactly what they were going to say, word for word, before it came out of their mouths. The more I could see, and the more I could see, the more I could understand, the more I could understand what they needed to be asked or told to lead them further into resolving and understanding and continuing the process of deconstructing the mental mechanisms that were holding them down, that were giving them negative attitudes, unwanted sensations and feelings, and so forth. And so I just continued along this path, and I continue along this path. I've recognized that I can learn from everybody and anybody around me. We all have useful observations and ideas, and very often I'm struck by the brilliance of a casual statement from a friend, a colleague, or one of my participants, and I evolve accordingly. I believe everything in life is a work in progress, and always should be looked at that way. There should be no cults, no paradigms, no religions that say we have a finite point reached where we've got all the answers we need and they're all correct and they're all right and there's no more to learn. Or to accept authority without questioning it. Even if it's well-meaning, that doesn't mean they have all the answers. Nobody has ever or ever will have all the answers. So I continue to learn on a daily, even hour-by-hour, moment-by-moment basis. I continue to evolve my practice, and I take great joy and passion in what I do, in connecting with people, with understanding what's happening within them, and basically creating a context in which the other person feels safe and free to examine what they need to examine within themselves without fear. And that's the story of how I got here. I hope it was interesting and entertaining for you. I hope maybe it inspires you to trust your own instincts and follow your own path. Onward and upward for us all.